So allocation and assignment of resources, both in production and consumption. Okay. Um, but one of the things that I think is a helpful concept is when we're talking about mechanisms, we said that it could be auctions, could be lots of different things. There could be cultural mechanisms for assigning resources based on, if you were the chief of a tribe, that you had ways of, assigning plots of land to people in your tribe. But um, the deeper connection is that um, allocation mechanisms are sometimes called rationing mechanisms. And it's worth pointing out that the word rationing um, is important. I don't know if you guys remember hearing about rationing in the context of World War II rationing with rubber or steel. But rationing is where the government um, normally strictly assigns um, a certain amount of a good to different uses to different people at different times. And so um, the idea is there's not enough to go around. So when the government was rationing fuel and rubber and steel during World War II, it's because they were using a lot of those resources for their war effort, and there wasn't enough for domestic consumption. So um, rationing gets really close to this notion of scarcity that you see mentioned so often in textbooks um, that describe economics. A lot of times, um, textbooks will simply define economics as the study of scarcity, the idea that there's not enough of a resource to go around. So that's all by way of background. And I should tell you guys, we didn't really talk about it last time, that that within economics, right, we have these two major sub-disciplines, um, macroeconomics and microeconomics. And the difference is that microeconomics, what you guys are going to be studying with me, deals with the choices that individual consumers and businesses make, and with individual markets. So, like the market for cell phones, for example, or the market for labor. And macroeconomics deals with economy-wide phenomena like economic growth and inflation. And so there's some overlap between the two. In particular, there's one area that we'll talk about, a bit in this class, which is dealing with labor and the labor market in particular. And because the national labor market is tied pretty heavily to the total amount of output that's produced in the country, you'll hear macroeconomists talk about the labor market too. But um, apart from the labor market, the topics between micro and macroeconomics don't really overlap a lot. There's there's some obviously methodology overlap. We both talk about supply and demand type models, but it's not. It really ends. The similarity ends pretty quickly after that. So microeconomics is the study of individual, and um, we call businesses business firms, or for short, just firms, individual firm, and consumer behavior, and how those behaviors affect resource allocation. Okay, so that's the gist of what we're doing. So now I want to take a little detour and um, share the screen from Magnesium, which you guys have seen before. So what I've done here is I'm on the home page and I'm looking at practice and I'm looking at the preliminary section, which is just on math. Now, I want to point out to you guys that really there is math required in this class, but the math level might be a little bit deceptive. So you can see that there are equations described here, but you guys are only having the equations described for sake of reference. So there's no um, case in this class where you'll be dealing with lots of equations and doing many lines of algebra. That's not true. You'll have to do some calculations. So fundamentally, when we end up talking about economics and the decisions that business and consumers make, and we're interested in prices and quantities, and those are numbers. So you can't really get away from numbers in economics. In fact, the kind of maybe dirty little secret of economics is, or maybe not so dirty, is that it's an applied math discipline. So it's like statistics, but I think that people in statistics are a little bit more upfront, when you get into a statistics class, okay, I'm gonna be doing a bunch of math here. And I think that economics maybe is one of those things where it's not quite so upfront. There's lots of interesting concepts that we use to describe the math, but at the end of the day, there is some math. So um, I would expect that, generally speaking, as you guys look through these, I don't know how many there are. I think there are 14 like preliminary questions that you can answer most of them. There's one of them, this number 14 one, and we can talk about it next time we get together, but it's a little bit tricky. And it actually, so if you do all 14 of these problems, and I picked them particularly because if you can do all 14 of them, if you understand all 14 of them, then I don't think that there's any single problem in the rest of the class that you'll struggle with. But this last one is a little bit tricky. So I don't know if tricky is the right word. I mean, ask you the question, all the numbers are there, but you have to think carefully um, about what it's asking you. And so again, we'll talk about it next time. So okay, do you guys have any questions for me about any of this stuff? No. Okay, good. So I'll stop sharing that, and we'll go back to the whiteboard. All right. Okay, so you guys can all see the whiteboard now? Yeah? Thumbs up? Whiteboard?
Yeah.
Okay, 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 good. All right. So the majority of this class is going to deal with the supply and demand model. Okay. So and if you listen to people, um, discuss this stuff in popular culture, a lot of people will say, well, economics is all about supply and demand. And, to be clear, that's true, you know, for, um, probably, I don't know, 75% of the discipline is all about supply and demand. So we take each one of the topics in turn, and the first one that we want to talk about is demand. Okay, and so we should begin with demand by defining it. Um, so demand is a relationship. Now, as you guys know, relationships can be complicated. So so bear that in mind. It's a relationship between the price of a product and the quantity of the product demanded by consumers. And you can't really say it more simply than that. Okay. Um, Now, a lot of times there's a pretty, um, you know, uh, early on sticking point, which is that a lot of people get confused between the concept, and I'll put an exclamation point with an equal sign, which means it's not equal. I could put another exclamation point just to emphasize it. So demand is not equal to quantity demanded. Um, the reason this comes up is in common conversation, it's typical for people, if they do use the word demand at all, to use it to refer to a specific quantity of the good that they would buy at a specific price. So sometimes when I'm in lecture with students, I would play a little game with them where I would say, you know, um, what's your demand for bottled water at $1 per bottle? Um, and then, I would take, um, let's see if I can get the chat up. So then I would take a little poll and go around and ask a couple of different students. So um, let's see. Who should I ask? How about Anthony? You have your mic, Anthony?
Yeah, I have my mic.
Yeah. Oh, I was doing Anthony Ramsey's Anthony Sandoval. You guys can both respond. So Anthony Ramsey, you hear me too?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll ask Anthony Sandoval first. So how much water would you demand at a price of dollar for $1 for bottled water? You can put it in the chat if you want.
For for bottled water for $1,
Per bottle.
I'd probably $1 per bottle.
Yeah.
Probably like 5 bottles.
For 5 bottles. Yeah. And it depends on the period of time, right?
Yeah.
Am I talking about a week, a month, a day? I don't know. But let's just say in a week. So,
And and probably like 5 to 7 bottles, one for
Okay.
each day.
Okay. And what about you, Anthony?
Right, like around 10.
10 for a week. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with the way that you guys responded, but it's informal conversation, right? Because the way that I said the question is I said, what is your demand, right? But truly, demand is a whole relationship between different prices and different quantities. So the way that I asked the question was bad, right? I picked one price. I said at $1 per bottle, right? And um, what I should do to get your demand is see at different prices. So at 50 cents per bottle, at $1 per bottle, at $1.50 per bottle, at $2 per bottle, how your quantity changes. And so if I'm talking about demand the way that economists do, I need a bunch of different prices and a bunch of different quantities. But what you guys actually gave me was what economists would call your quantity demanded at a particular price. So as you read questions, either in homeworks on Ignithium, the little quizzes that are given, or if you read stuff in your book, make sure that you understand the difference between demand or quantity demanded. And if it's not quite clear yet, then by the end of the lecture, I'm pretty sure it will be. And if it's not, then we'll talk about it again. But every discipline, including economics, has jargon, and that means they have a special way that they use language within their discipline, and there are a bunch of different reasons for that. One is to make communication between people that know economics quick and convenient. It's kind of a shorthand, like you're in the club and we all know this, so we don't need to worry about it. But it's also, in some sense, meant to exclude other people from the conversation. So, um, uh, I'll give you guys one example, just really quickly, and that is that economists base all of their theory, or at least almost all of their theory, say 95% of their theory, and all the theory you guys are going to learn about, and all the theory that's in most undergraduate curricula. So it's not something people normally talk about unless they go to graduate school. But all of our economic theories are based on the assumption that people are rational. And that oftentimes is misunderstood because you and I, have this dinner table conversation notion of what rationality means. And to us, rationality means like, behaving in a not crazy way, whatever crazy means to you. But in economics, rationality identifies a set of mathematical assumptions. So when people outside of the discipline hear that economists assume that people are rational, they immediately think of the dinner table conversation idea. They don't know that there's a special way of using rationality that's just purely related to these mathematical concepts within the discipline. And so demand and quantity demanded, we're starting to see that right away, that there's a special way that we use the language, both for precision and convenience. And so it's something you guys should be alerted to. Hopefully I've done that. So I said demand is a relationship, but I didn't do anything to describe the relationship. So the first general description of the relationship between price and quantity demanded is something called the law of demand. And the law of demand simply just states that, and I'll do it in a couple different ways because there are a couple different ways to say it. The law of demand says as the price of a good or service, right, increases, uh, a consumer tends to purchase less. That's the easiest way of saying it, right? But you guys probably also immediately see that that means also that as the price of a good decreases, a consumer, and maybe I should put a little comma in here. A consumer tends to purchase more of the good. Now, so you can see it works right in the opposite direction. If price goes up, the quantity people want to buy goes down. And as the price goes down, the quantity people want to buy goes up. And that's supposed to just be a general description of the relationship. So again, if we did this little survey with the two Anthonys, and who knows, maybe I have three Anthonys in the class. I don't know. I don't know that I've ever had two Anthonys in the class before. Not that it's a very uncommon name. It's just that, yeah, I think you guys are the only two. So if I was to do another survey, right, and to say, okay, Anthony's, if, now we're talking about the price of a bottle of water, $1 per bottle, and how many you would buy in a week, give me that quantity. That's one point. That's a quantity demanded at a specific price. Now I'm going to raise the price to $1.50 a bottle. Give me your new quantity. And I'm going to lower it to 50 cents a bottle. Give me your new quantity. And I'm going to lower it to 25 cents a bottle. Give me your new quantity. I don't know, but I'm guessing that your responses would obey the law of demand. That if I lowered the price down to 25 cents, you'd buy more. And if I raise it to $1.50 or $2 a bottle, you'd buy less. Now, I don't know if you guys think that's controversial. Is there anybody here who doesn't think that their behavior is well described by the law of demand with respect to any particular good? Because if so, I'd like to hear about it. Sometimes people have interesting examples. Is there anything you guys can think about that if the price is raised, you don't purchase less, and if the price is lowered, you don't purchase more?
iPhones.
Oh, okay, so who's that?
James Weatherby.
Okay, James. So tell us your example.
Like luxury goods such as iPhones or other things that are status symbols to buy. If they're more expensive, you might want them more.
Okay, so iPhones are a luxury? I thought they were a necessity.
Well, smartphones are a necessity, maybe.
Because, my wife and my daughter, they all got to have an iPhone. I don't know. I mean, I have an Android device that's like
Same, but socially, you got to have an iPhone.
five generations old. Can't I just like get a case that has a little Apple on the back of it? You don't see the phone half the time anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So okay. So you pointed out actually something that's mentioned in most economics textbooks, like towards the end of the book, and it's one of those places where, so your example is probably a good one, though. It depends, but they talk about network effects, and what network means is that you don't really care about the good itself, but like you said, you're buying a status symbol. It has more to do with the perceptions of people in your network that you're purchasing. So though I would probably argue that if you discount the network effect, right? You could get the exact same network response from a lower price. You would be more willing, and that's why people buy knockoff goods, right? Because it's
Mm,
I could get a
that makes
Gucci,
sense.
but it's really a Gucky or whatever, right? And
Right.
I'll buy that more than other stuff. Um, so yeah, but you're right. There are some notable exceptions, and they generally fall under these category of network effects, and they have to do with not directly consuming the good. But actually, I'll give a clap to Mr. Weatherby. I think that was a good point. Um,
I have
so,
one.
does anybody else have another one?
Yes, I do. My name's Yasmin.
Okay,
Um,
Yasmina or Yasmin?
Yasmin.
Okay, Yasmin. Okay.
What about gas?
Oh, okay. This is a very interesting case. So I don't think there are any network effects taken into consideration in the case of gas. So that would be really interesting. Um, but I think that there's something interesting we're going to also talk about soon. But in the case of network effects, it would be like if your gas had a reputation. So, like I know there are some people that won't buy Arco gas. They haven't figured that out, but supposedly Arco gas is like not good gas. I don't know. Um, but assuming it's actually the same quality of gas, so I'd ask you this. So Yasmin, have you been buying a lot of gas lately?
Not since COVID, but
Yeah,
before, yeah.
yeah, right. Because a lot of people argue, well, like gas is a necessity. Like I need to, you know, go to school. I got to go to my job. If gas goes up, I still have to buy the same amount of gas. But notice that, and this is one of the things that we're going to talk about. That's sort of a caveat, which means it's a detail we have to make note of in any analysis that we're going to be doing, is the time period, right? So the demand for gasoline does obey the law of demand, and one of the ways you can see that is I don't know, Yasmin, were you around when gas was getting close to $5 a gallon here locally? This was you probably weren't driving then.
I remember it, but I wasn't old enough to drive.
Yeah. So and then I don't know, do you remember how people responded to that besides just outrage?
I don't. I do remember though my grandma like always complaining about it.
Yeah. Well, guess what was the most popular car to purchase at the time?
I have no idea.
Have you ever heard of a Toyota Prius?
Yes.
They were on back order because this
Oh,
was like before like Tesla got big and other things like that. So the idea that you could, with a hybrid vehicle like a Toyota Prius, get like 80 miles a gallon. So they were back ordered and people were paying like thousands of dollars over the sticker price to try to switch out and of their gas guzzling vehicles. So I don't, again, no, because like I said, you were a little bit young. But also the other thing you might have figured out is that there was a big decrease in demand for SUVs. People didn't want to, and actually the SUVs have gotten smaller. So so I'm trying to remember the it's the so they have the one that's bigger than the big Ford that they have right now. It was they have the Ford um, um,
like Expedition?
what's bigger than the Expedition?
Well, no, I don't even know Suburban,
What
but I
was
don't know
there
if
anything?
that's GMC.
No, I think that there
The
was
Explorer?
no Explorer's smaller.
Oh.
Are you talking about like the F-350s, F-450s? Those would be the
No,
biggest kind of four.
yeah, no, I was maybe it's the Expedition that I was talking about, but they don't make it anymore. But I think they still make Expeditions.
They do
But
make expeditions.
Don't buy an
There's one size
Expedition.
bigger. There's a bigger one.
yeah, and I forget
They
it's
don't
got to.
make it anymore though.
Yeah, they don't make it anymore, and that's when they stopped making it. Yeah, the Excursion, that was the one. Thank you, Matthew. So, and you guys are like Ford Excursion, and yeah, it's like a little piece of real estate on wheels. It's I don't know. It's big, but they don't make it anymore. And
They're bad
so,
cars.
what's that, Yasmin?
That's a bad car.
Oh, bad car, bad car. So, but the point is that, and also this was before, like, I don't know if you guys paid attention to the Hummer lineup or not, but in the beginning, like the H1, total respect. I mean, it was only 8 miles a gallon, but that was a vehicle that could command my attention. But then when they got to like the H2 and the H3s, I was like, is that really? It doesn't seem like a Hummer anymore. But they had to do that because people weren't buying the big H1s anymore. I don't even know if they still make them and if they're in distribution. But the main point is, one of the ways, when you instead of measure gas for the next week, if you measure it over a month or over a year, when the price goes up and is sustained at a high level, people switch their behavior so that they can consume less gas. They get rid of gas guzzling vehicles. They start to buy more fuel efficient vehicles. And, when I think I told you guys that when I first got out of graduate school from UC Santa Barbara, I went to go work in the Netherlands. I taught at a university there for about a year and a half. And guess what? Nobody had a big SUV. So when gas prices are like $4 a gallon here, they're like $16 a gallon over there. And so most people that do drive at all drive like the little smart cars, and almost everybody rides their bicycle. Even when I was over there, I used to ride my bicycle back and forth to work. So their cities are designed to save fuel because people tend to live close to where they work. So, and then there's lots of public transportation options. In the winter, because it gets cold there, when it would get down to like a 0 degrees, then it was too cold to ride the bike. So, I would take the bus. But guess what? When I got on the bus, so before I left to go to the Netherlands, I'm from Southern California. I was actually originally born in Huntington Park. So HP. So Huntington Park Hospital, that's where I was born. And I never rode the bus when I was down here. The couple times that I did ride the bus, I felt unsafe. The other people that were on the bus with me, didn't look like, they necessarily had other people's best interests in mind at all times. So, I would sit right near the driver and, get out at my stop right away and stuff like that. But in the Netherlands, I was riding on the bus and it's super clean. There are people in three-piece business suits, grandmas with their groceries, just regular folks going back and forth to work. So there were good public transportation options. So, and now we have Uber and Lyft. So I guess the point is that though a lot of people bring up the idea of gasoline, I can tell you that even though in the short term it's difficult for people to switch, that once gas got to like $16 a gallon here, a lot more of us would be taking public transportation, and a lot more of us would be doing ride sharing, and a lot more of us would be finding ways to carpool and do things to conserve on gasoline. So, so yeah, I think that you're right that the demand is pretty inflexible, and we'll talk about that later. By inflexible, we have this special term that economists use. We call it inelastic. Flexible and elastic means sort of the same thing. So inelastic or inflexible demand for a good between, like $2.50 and $4. But even there is some decrease as we see the price go up, because I don't know about how many of you have, when gas prices are low, you just drive around, you go hang out with your friends, you don't think about it. If you got somebody that lives, a couple hours away, they're having a birthday party or whatever, you just go. But when gas gets like close to $4.50 a gallon, then you start to think, well, there are some of those trips that I don't have to take. And so even though the decrease is small, because people will tend to, right, still purchase enough gas so that they can get back and forth to work, they do decrease their gas usage a little bit by cutting out those unnecessary trips, and doing things like trip chaining. Trip chaining is where, like, you wait to go get your haircut until you need to go get your haircut and get groceries, because the haircut and the grocery place are in the same little location. So you can save gas that way. So a lot of times people do that. So okay. So I give a little clap to Yasmin too, because that was a good idea. But yeah, I don't think it violates the law of demand. And I would tell you that there's evidence that it doesn't violate the law of demand. Okay, so I'll give a last chance to anybody else who wants to think about something that violates the law of demand. Did you want to talk
Yeah.
about Don? Well, Don, who was it? Don was going to raise his hand.
Yeah, I just raised my hand because I'm Zhu Chen Zhang asked earlier. He was talking about antiques, and he said they need to be valuable. Like as they get older, their value increases.
Yeah, but that's kind of like a different case, right? Because there, we wouldn't be talking about. Well, first of all, I'll tell you something else that's weird. And I think Zhu Chen's comment um, is a good place to highlight this. What we're talking about is the demand for goods and services that you personally consume, right? Like I eat a burrito, I consume a gallon of gasoline, I buy a bottle of water for my personal consumption, right? It's only when you start to talk about things like we talked about earlier, where there's like reputation effects, you're not really, and even then you're buying the iPhone for yourself, but we got to be, a little bit more careful. But the other class, besides reputation effects, where we talk about demand, but things are different, is when we're talking about the demand for assets, right? Stocks, bonds, antiques, right? Because a lot of times people are buying those for what we call investment purposes. And so they're not buying them because, and they may enjoy the antique while they have it, but if they're buying it, not just because, and most antiques will last, right? You're not buying it just because you want to drive a 57 Chevy, but you're buying it 57 Chevy plus I know that when I sell it, right, there's some asset appreciation that is going to be factored in there, because they're not making any more 57 Chevys, that kind of thing. So it also turns out that if you think about stocks and bonds, the way that people respond to changes in the price of stock isn't the same either. Amazon stock has shot through the roof since COVID. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the markets at all, but Amazon stock is way up. And it makes sense, right? Because a lot more people are doing home delivery instead of going out. But guess what? There are a lot of people that are interested in purchasing Amazon, even though the price went way up. right? Because they still think it's a good investment. And the point is, though, they're not buying Amazon to eat the Amazon, right? They're buying Amazon because they're thinking about the future earning potential of that asset, and that at some point in the future they may sell it, and they may enjoy the appreciation. So we're talking about consumption goods and services, but when we talk about network effects and assets, that's a different category. So that's a good comment. Thanks to both of you. And I think there was one other person. I want to cut you off, but somebody else I thought was going to chime in really quickly. I didn't see who it was. Was there anybody else? Yeah. So
I had the idea of like basic like living necessities, like you were saying, like groceries or anything that's really like needed to live. That really wouldn't change because people need it.
yeah, and see, the thing is, like we said, I think this falls in the same category with the gasoline. Is like what it means to be a necessity. Um, really means that something about that people tend to have an inflexible demand for it, but when the price goes up, they still end up consuming less of it for lots of different reasons. One of them might just be they can't afford it, you know. So this happens a lot of times in the case of people that have medications. So my mom, she's in that stage of life where she's taking a bunch of pills all the time. And she takes one medication for her heart called Eliquis. And it's a name brand, and it's not covered by her Medicare, plans and stuff like that. And, it gets expensive, and, you know, she feels kind of trapped, but, um, you know, if it gets too expensive, she just won't buy it because she literally can't afford it. Um, and so her demand is inflexible, but she's not completely insensitive to the price. One of the things that I saw my mom doing before, which I thought she shouldn't be doing, but she's doing it nonetheless, is she'd say, well, I don't really need the whole pill, so I'll just take a half a pill a day. So she would cut her own pills and take a little bit less than what she was supposed to, again, to try to reduce her costs. And that's a demand response too. But the two exceptions that I'll put in, I won't put in necessities because then demand is inflexible, but not completely different from the law of demand. But I'll put this network goods and / reputation effects, and I'll also put assets. So in those cases, the law of demand, these exceptions, the law of demand doesn't describe the relationship between price and quantity demand as we'd expect it would. But the last thing that I want to say on this is there's a more general description, and that is, and I'll write it here as another way of describing the law of demand. The law of demand, and you'll see both of these, is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. And you'll also see, or is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So inverse just means as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down, and vice versa. And that's also with a negative relationship. Negative relationship is a little bit more clear that, if the change in one of the things like price increasing, that's a positive change, right? But I know if I multiply a positive by a negative, right, I'll get a negative number. So the negative relationship is meant to capture the idea that if I have a positive change in one of the variables, the change in the other variable is described by multiplying the first variable by the first variable is changed by a negative number. So I get a negative change. But in any case, they're all talking about the same basic idea, which is, as the price of the good increases, the consumer tends to decrease the quantity that they desire to purchase. That's the other thing that sometimes trips people up a little bit is demand is kind of like a wish list, right? In that is like a quote wish list, because it describes what people would do under a particular circumstance that may or may not occur, right? It describes the quantity a consumer is willing and able to purchase at let's say the quantities a consumer is willing and able to purchase at particular prices, and I'll put in parentheses that may or may never be offered by sellers. So this is another kind of issue that you guys don't have to worry about. But unless we actually do a survey of consumers, and when people that are economists, professional economists, and marketers that are trying to figure out what demand is for their product, they do conduct surveys and they do focus groups and they do test pricing, where they'll have a test price in a certain area but not available in other areas and things like that, to try to observe how consumers as a group will respond, or how particular consumers in their survey would respond to different prices for the good that they never see. But in general, outside of those circumstances, we don't ever see how people actually would behave at price extremes, except for maybe some rare circumstance. Sometimes they have things happen like you'll get I don't know if you guys read about this or not, but there was a big hurricane that hit Houston a couple years ago, and because of people getting out of the area and there being lots of traffic, they call it price gouging, and they would have some of the people that were running the gas stations along the route saw an advantage or to take advantage of the circumstance, and they raised the price of gasoline to like $10 a gallon, and they were charging people lots of money for bottles of water and things like that. But so you rarely see outside those circumstances how at the extremes people would behave. So I also want to talk a little bit about how do we represent demand in in economics. And we have three different representations of demand. And they all have their use, and they're roughly equivalent to one another. Um, and it just depends. Some have more information available than the other. One is called a demand schedule, and it is a list of prices and quantities. So, when I say a list, I mean a double column list. At each price, it lists a quantity. So, I'll call it a table. And you'll see examples of demand schedules in your textbook. There's also a demand curve, and it is a graph of the demand relationship. And we use the term curve, but in this class, I don't think there are any examples, though there are some in your textbook, that aren't lines. So the word curve is sometimes confusing to students because they're like, it's a line, it's not curving. But the word curve in mathematics is just the graph of a function, and it could be a linear function. So we call it the demand curve, but mostly the curves are, and I'll put it in quotes, the curves are straight lines. Okay. And the last one is what you guys saw in some of the problems, which are demand functions or equations. And I think that speaks for itself. It's just if you have a line, you guys know you can have a linear equation that describes the line. And so we could have that too, and that's fine. Like I said, in this class, the focus will be on the second representation. And so all the stuff that you guys are going to do, I'll say 95% of it is going to be looking at these graphs and interpreting what's going on with them. Okay. So, okay. So the other thing that I want to point out is that we have demand at the individual consumer level. And so what that means is, like when I was going through and talking with the Anthonys, at any case where I want to talk to an individual, I can elicit responses from them and figure out what their particular, that person's demand is for a good or service. So, so we can, plot the points on a graph for let's say Anthony Ramsey's demand for water. And we could do the same thing for our other Anthony, which I'm trying to remember what his last name was.
Sandoval.
So yeah, Anthony Sandoval. And we ended up with two different curves, one for Anthony or one graph for Anthony, one graph for Anthony Ramsey, and one for Anthony Sandoval. So, but most of the time in this class, we'll be dealing with market demand curves. Now, defining a market is difficult, okay? But I'll just do it generally here and say market is a collection of consumers. Simple, right? Now, it's such a general definition, it's not very helpful. A lot of times people try to give geometric and geographic and time limitations. I'm talking about the demand for gasoline in the county of Los Angeles in the year 2020. Well, then you know better who's the collection of consumers that are going to be passing through and potential buyers of gasoline in Los Angeles County. That's fine. But for our purposes, it's just important to keep in mind that we're talking about a group of potential consumers, and unless it's necessary for our illustrations, we'll be specific about, oh, we're measuring the demand for the day or for the hour or for the year. But as long as you keep your time reference the same for all the consumers in the group and all the suppliers in the group, then you can properly work through all of the details you need to get answers to any question and have them be reasonable. It's only when you do something weird, like you measure the supply of gasoline for a year, but the demand for gasoline for a week, that you end up getting results that don't make sense. So you have to be a little bit careful to make sure that you're matching the time period. If you do things in a sensible way, you should never run into any problem. But occasionally, you see that there's a mismatch to the time frame. So it's a collection of consumers, and the important point is that the collection is composed of the individual level behavior, such that the market demand curve is and this is going to be a little bit unusual, but it's a necessary term, is the horizontal summation of individual demand curves. So I'll talk about that for just a minute, because this idea of horizontal summation is important, and it becomes even more important as you move along in economics if you're trying to work on making sense out of aggregating or adding together individual demand curves. But so there's some nuance there, but the gist of it is really straightforward and simple. So I'll use this illustration. So notice that, and hopefully you guys could see my little arrow. Notice, well, let me do a little bit more labeling here. Here's the price, and I'll do dollars. And here's the quantity of bottled water. And so notice as I look along, this is the demand for, let's say this is the demand for Anthony Ramsey for bottled water. And I could put different prices there too. just for purposes of illustration, we'll say $3 and $1. Okay. So in my illustration, I'm saying at $3 per bottle, Anthony Ramsey demands 0 bottles of water. So this is the origin, that's 0 there. If you guys have any questions about that, just ask me. I'm assuming that everybody's on board here with the graph. And at $1, and I didn't specify the quantity, but if I go off of the line and I'll make up that corresponds to a quantity of 5. So notice my scale on the horizontal and vertical axes aren't the same, but that shouldn't cause too much trouble. So at a price of 1, I go over here, and then I say that matches up with 5 units on the horizontal axis at a price of $1. He would demand a quantity of 5. Now I'll do the same thing. So I guess that was Anthony Ramsey. So I'll do the same thing for Anthony Sandoval, but we'll say Anthony Sandoval has a greater demand for bottled water. And in particular, we'll say at a price of 3, he would demand 8 bottles of water. So let's try to be clear about this. And so here's the price of 3. And I think that if I select this, I'm trying to change the font so we can see that that's a different line, but it's not cooperating with me. So, okay. Okay. So that blue line is not, it's just supposed to indicate points, not be a solid line for the purposes of the graph. Let me try to line this up here. Okay. So all I'm trying to show you guys is that 3 corresponds to a quantity of 8 for Anthony Sandoval. And then Anthony Sandoval's maximum quantity, let's say, is at a price of 5. That's the highest price at which then his demand drops to 0. Okay. And we'll do one other point here, which will be helpful for us. And okay. So at a price of 1, okay. And that looks like, I'll say it looks like about 16. Okay. So what does horizontal summation mean? Well, it means that for the market, the way that we aggregate the demand for these two consumers is we go down price, and when we hit the price of 5, then that's where the market begins. There's one individual there, that's where he's at 0, and if we just drop it a little bit, he begins demanding bottles of water. Now notice that we're kind of playing fast and loose because you can demand a half of a water bottle, half of a water bottle, or a quarter water bottle. It's infinitely divisible because this line is continuous. That's just an assumption. We can deal with discrete goods, but because we don't deal with discrete goods normally, we assume there's continuous divisibility. I'll just, use the solid lines instead of like stair steps, which is what you would have for discrete goods. But anyway, he begins demanding water when price drops below $5, and he's the only one in the market. So this would actually be his demand curve would be the market demand curve at the beginning. And so I'll do the market demand curve here in like bold or red, if it'll let me. Okay. So we would follow along his demand curve. And then once Anthony Ramsey, the price got low enough for Anthony Ramsey to begin purchasing the good, then we would add in the quantities that Anthony Ramsey would also purchase at whatever price we're talking about here, below 3, right? So we start out at the high price, we get that one consumer, and it's just that consumer in the market. Then once the price drops low enough, we get quantities being demanded from the other consumer. And then we add the quantities, and this is why the case of the $1 price is a good example for us, because we'll say at a price of $1, we get 5 units from Anthony Ramsey, right? Plus at $1, Anthony Sandoval demands 16. So in the market, then we would have 5 plus 16. We're adding in this horizontal dimension. That's what it means, right? And so we'd have 5 plus 16. And so for purpose of illustration, I'll say this looks like about 21 to me. So about right there. And I'll okay. So if I do a good job, at 1 we'll hit 21. And then the slope shouldn't change. Okay, I think that's good. So okay. So yeah. So my graph's a little bit off, but I think you guys get the idea. I could move it around more. If you, well, hold on. Let me see. And then move this one. Okay. I think that does it. So so you guys get what I mean? We're adding up the quantities at each price, And that's the horizontal summation. Now, you guys might have wondered really quickly, and this is the last thought I'll leave you with because we're out of time, I know, is that, well, if we didn't add it horizontally, what else could we do? Well, typically, the reason why we do the horizontal summation is because typically in math, if you guys remember, if you add functions, you stack them vertically, right? So if I had these two equations and I just added them together and I wasn't being thoughtful about it, I would end up getting a new equation that was the vertical stacking or the vertical summation of those. And we don't want to do that. We're adding the quantities at each price. That's what you do in a market. You see at a price, a particular price, the quantity that all of the consumers together, adding them up, will give you, and that gives you the market demand. Okay, so I'll say last here, at each price, we take the total market quantity by adding what each consumer would purchase across all consumers and adding them together. Okay, so that's it. So I'll ask you guys, do you have a question for me?
So there's nothing due until the